Binakchen, blessings, women. I have notes so you know what that means, especially those of you who know me. I'm here today with a list of lies, with a sample of stories we tell ourselves about ourselves because we've been told that they are true. This is the story that in order to get your needs met, you need to have power over someone else. This is the story that our earth is a resource, not a relation. This is the story of growth and progress, of permanence and perfection, of divide and rule. This is the story that it is our daughters' desirability, not their desires, that matters. This is the story that their mother's value is determined by their palatability to the male gaze. This is the story that the rights of women's bodies are only to be decided upon by their predators and perpetrators. This is the story that sameness means equality. This is the story that only people have personhood. This is the story that knowledge overrides gnosis, that the intellect outweighs the imaginal. And the list goes on and on. But these stories are not true. In fact, they're not even stories at all. They are agreements based on what our conquerors want us to know. They are contracts to the conditions necessary for our colonizers to dominate within. They are propaganda. Capitalism has a vested interest in keeping us compliant with and complicit to, which is essentially to diminish and destroy diversity. So, where did these stories, these lies that have sustained the violent systems of othering and oppression, of patriarchy, where did they come from? For those of us in North America, the methodologies of colonialism that are foundational to our current dominant culture arose out of the burning times. Or, to take a term back from those in politics under the immunity of white male privilege who, in their utter ignorance and arrogance, dare to use the term, the witch hunts. This was not an event. This was a premeditated paradigm of enclosure. Enclosure of knowledge, enclosure of bodies, enclosure of resources, enclosure of rights. The witch hunts were designed to target and demonize women with expertise, with any kind of specialization that granted them authority and therefore power. Women's spheres of sovereignty had a long lineage of folk wisdom based on ancient, ancestral, and therefore pagan practices, which posed a threat to the claim of religious superiority that the dissemination of a story of male supremacy and female submissiveness was trying to impose. Let me read you a quote to summarize this by Sharon Blackie, Dr. Sharon Blackie. She is a feminist mythologist, academic, and psychotherapist, and she puts it this way. Women had been given a story to carry, which both defined and instructed them about the place they occupied in this world, a story that accorded no such significance to women. In this story, woman was an afterthought, created from a man's body for the sole purpose of pleasing him. In this story, the first woman was the cause and cause of all humanity's sufferings. She brought death to the world, not life. No matter what women might achieve in the world, the fundamental message of this story was that men should not trust women and that women should trust neither themselves nor each other. And that is from Dr. Sharon Blackie's book, If Women Rose Rooted. So, for a period of about 300 years throughout Europe, if you were or were accused of being a practitioner of the healing arts, of herbalism, of folk medicine, midwifery, shamanism, divination, or priestessing, if you worshipped a goddess from the lineage of your ancestors, if you left offerings to the earth in groves or at stones or along rivers that had long been held sacred, if you were an elderly woman, if you were a spinster, if you had a female lover, or had a disability or a neurodivergence, if you were perceived in any way as a radical or a rebel against the machinery of the system, then you were targeted, demonized, and sexually tortured into admission to false accusations, and then murdered. Murdered by drowning, by having your thumbs tied to your toes, or by being burned alive at the stake. So at this point, there had already been nearly 2,000 years of systemic destruction of the sacred feminine from cultural content and context. We were written out of all of our mythologies, our iconographies, and spiritual pathways. Our wisdom traditions, our rites and practices were villainized, they were censored, they were forbade. And our bodies, behaviors, and biologies were shamed as dirty, flawed, immoral, wanton, and feral. This cultural genocide of women, practicing and experiencing the relationship to life, and that is a beautiful term by Woman Stands Shining, also known as Pat McCabe. So this cultural genocide of women has survived because of the money and power that has backed it up, and that continues as the pervasive messaging of misogyny today. Silvia Federici is the author of a book called Caliban and the Witch, and she calls this state terrorism, and it still exists. As a result, we live in a society that has become so distanced from the nature of the feminine that we, both men and women, are no longer familiar or oftentimes even comfortable with its qualities. And those qualities are the liminal, the emotional, the relational, the receptive, the inclusive, the intuitive, and the non-linear. This is the witch wound. And experienced Portia Richardson from the University of Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Healing explains, as defined by, and I quote, an illusion of separateness, a deep disconnect from your cultural lineage and ancient wisdom ways, a profound level of disembodiment, an oppression of your personal power and sovereignty, a suppression of emotional expression, a primal fear of speaking your truth to power and being seen, a disenchantment with the belief in your intuitive abilities and capacity to sense subtle energies, a mistrust of communal support, a degradation of reciprocal, respectful relationships with the larger web of life. The witch wound then, end quote, the witch wound then is all forms of othering and oppression. I personally am not interested in calling out anyone or anything. That's really just simply perpetuating the same model of shaming that has gotten us here in the first place. Rather, I'm interested in calling in dismantling enclosure and creating space for disclosure, for our real stories to be heard. And that's without editing and without filters or selectiveness or light washing, so that we can actually decolonize our bodies, our knowledge, our resources, and our rights. And essentially heal our collective voice from being contested, ignored, silenced, and slandered. I've been a part of a lot of panels, discussions, courses. I've read books upon books upon books. And I've come to the conclusion that we've been studying and theorizing and intellectualizing our way through this, i.e. masculinizing our way through this process for long enough, and it's actually now time to embody it. So I was out for a walk one day, and an inspiration landed in me not so long ago that said, every woman is a bridge. And my first thought was, tell me more. So first I looked at it, well, what is a bridge? A bridge, it is that which connects a divide. It is the suture that heals. It is the stitch that mends. It is the link that unites. It is the fascia that binds. It is the knot that fastens. And just to add a little etymological history here, fasten is the sister of fascination, which means to create a hold through enchantment or to bewitch. It is the space in between that holds the both and. It is the liminal, the emotional, the relational, the receptive, the inclusive, the intuitive, the nonlinear. It is woman. For millennia, the power over paradigm has systemically built walls of enclosure. But it is my sense that for millennia to come, our pathwork and our purpose here is to build bridges of disclosure. And it starts with you. You are a bridge. And your single thread matters because by virtue of your being here, it is hitched to the greater web of life. And so the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves also matter. In this space, it is my intention to create bridges, to remember, literally put back together that which has been dismembered through the witch wound, to reweave women's wisdom traditions of our foremothers in community through practical embodied practices in these gatherings that I am calling bridge casts. We cast a line, right? We cast a fate, we cast a mold, we cast a course, and we also cast away. We shed, we release, we heal. So my first question to you in healing the witch wound is to ask yourself, what story am I carrying that does not belong to me? And as you reflect on that question, I want you to notice the lungs. So in traditional Chinese medicine, the lungs hold on to grief, loss, and sadness. So notice as that which lifts from us that we thought and identified with, thought belonged to us, as that starts to lift, pay close attention to the lungs and nourish them. What you can do is rub the hands together and then place your hands on the lungs. And you're noticing and looking for any areas of congestion, of dullness, of heaviness. And we're looking for any grief, any sadness, any attachment that's starting to lift and all the residues surrounding that. You know, a lot can come up in the process of realizing that we're losing a part of the story we believed was true for so long. And in this Taoist tradition, we're building life force in the lungs and we're cleansing the lungs, which is one of those practical tools of embodiment that needs to accompany this process of healing and addressing the witch wound. And as you're breathing here into the lungs, what you can also do is draw in that healing white light of the full moon at midnight and feel the lungs expand with that light. With your exhale, you can just S like a snake, the sound out, and let that healing sound also heal the lungs. So in the spirit of disclosure, please share in this space your answer to what story am I carrying that does not belong to me. You can also print off what I will be including every time we meet here, which is an accompanying bridge card. And you can print it off, you can work with it in whatever way you want to as you continue to process and integrate and heal, and also therefore change your story to reflect your truth. Let me leave off with this. It's an old wise woman healing prayer or invocation, an incantation, and it goes bone to bone, blood to blood, limb to limb. Thus be they fitted together. Bionokchun. Blessings.